CSS Flex Box. Now, before we get into what CSS Flex Box is, we need to look at the background. Why CSS Flex Box? Why do we need it? Considering it's quite new, it was introduced in 2017. So before Flexbox, we had four main layout modes. We had the block, right, for showing different parts of the web page. For example, talked about this as a block, this ones as blocks as well. Then we're looking at inline, right? We have also looked at inline layout. Then we've looked at tables, and then we've not looked at positions, not at position elements. We'll get into that later. That's not really important right now. So that those are the four main layout modes that were available before, and although they got work done, but they were quite hard to work with. Right, it was really hard to make these guys work well, to make them as responsive as possible, um, make it easy to use. That's why Flexbox was introduced. Now, Flexbox, for every time I mention this, Flexbox makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layouts. Hence the name Flex. Makes it easier to design flexible layouts, responsive lay. Let me take that again. Makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layout structure without using positioning or float and all of that. Right? It makes it very easy to make your text look nice, make it look pretty, and and whatnot. So, and that's what we're going to get into today. Going to look at how you can write your own flex box to make it look nice. So right now we have these items, right? The items of the menu, of the navbar menu. We don't want them to be positioned. We don't want it to be like this, right? We want them to be positioned all on one straight line, not vertically, right? We want all of them to be on one horizontal line. Now, we, we could try adding them inside each other, but then that would not really be okay. Considering we want to give each of them different styles, then we're going to have issues, right? That's where flex comes in. Now, how do you define um your box? How do you define your div or your HTML tag as a flex? Right? Let's go into CSS always. Remember when we were talking about display types? Then we talked about block, talked about inline, and we talked about none. But then get ready to add one more, flex. Now this is fourth one, and that's what we're going to use. Now when you define a certain div as flex, automatically some changes happen, right? I'll explain this in just a minute. But immediately we defined it as flex, right? It's changed the layout. The items are no longer arranged vertically, but rather horizontally, all on one line. Why did this happen? Why do we have this? That's because the premise of flex is by default make every element inside it, whether or not they are box or they are inline, they are block or inline elements, make all of them all on one line. That's the idea for flex, so that you can easily walk around it. Yeah. So by default, it makes everything on one line. We call it row. We call it a row direction, and I'll show you in just a minute. And the idea there is this. Say for example, now we don't want it to be on row. We wanted it to be before, then we change our mind. Don't it to be on row. How do we work around this? That's where the flex direction comes in. Now, the flex direction, we have four main types of flex direction. We have the row, We have the row reverse, we have the column, and we have the column reverse. Row is the default. Is the default for every flex direction. Yeah. Then we have the row reverse. Row reverse does exactly what it says. Starts on the right, but then instead of um, the default way that we listed our items, it's gonna list it from the last to the first, right? So before here we had 1, 2, 3, 4, but here now we're having 4, 3, 2, 1. It reversed all the elements, right? Then that's for row reverse. Because row, if net row is the default, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we have the column. Now, what column does is it arranges the items vertically, right? All on one line. Now, this is different from earlier. These are now all members of the flex, and whatever rule is applied to flex here would apply to them as well. Right? Then, of course, we have column reverse. Sorry, we have column reverse because that's from 4 all the way to 1. That's exactly what your flex direction does. And now let's just put it on row. So we know it's by default, but just want to have it just for as a reminder, right? Um, the next thing we look at is justify content. I've said the property name, but what does it do? Like what justify content does is it defines the alignment along the axis that you currently chose. Right. Now, for example, now we chose the row axis, right? We chose the x-axis. So what justify content to do is to try to align all these items within the x-axis, within the horizontal axis. Yeah. Um, and then we have different types of it. We have 3, 4, 5, 6 types, right? We'll go through each of them. We'll not touch too much. We'll just show what they do. 6 main types actually. We have more than that, but we'll look at 6 main types. So let's look at the first one. To define that, we use justify content. Let's look at flex start. Now by default, justify content uses the flex start, meaning it starts the item on the left. That's basically what it does. Flex start the item on the left, right? Then we have the flex end, which you can think of it like row reverse, except in this case, it does not reverse the items, but it starts the items on the left, on the right rather. It floats everything all the way to the right. Then we have center. Center centers all the items. Centers that's what centers us. Centers all the items. Does not change the way they are arranged. It just centers them all on center of the whole thing, right? Then we have the space between. Now, space between is quite funny, right? What space between does is it spreads all the elements across the entire width of our box. Right? This entire width of our let me add a background color so that we can know what we are dealing with. Background color CCC, yeah. Okay. There we go. So what space even does is it adds even space between all the items and spreads them out across the entire width of the box that we're currently on, of the div or of the container that we're currently on. If the width of the container is lesser than this, is to do the same thing. I'll show you that in a minute. Then we have space around. Now, space around does something even nicer. It adds an even space at the outer edges of the items, then add um, spaces between the items. You can think of it like margin, right? You can think of it like margin on the outside, then spaces in between. So it gives an even space between on the outer edges of the items, right? In the div or in the container that we have, then adds an even space between the items as well. So that's what space around does. Yeah. Now let's look at space evenly. Most likely you'll be using most of this, but guess that's the means. Space evenly does almost the same thing, but kind of flips the spaces between the items to the ones outside the items, right? So like I said, we won't touch much on it. We'll just use them as needed later. For now, let's just let's go with center. Yeah. So let's go with center. Everything's on the center. Yeah. So although they are all matched together, we get into how to actually add spaces between them in just a minute. Oh, by the way, justified content does not only work for rows, it also works for columns, and I'll show you that in a minute. Let me move from center to flex between. Yeah. Now, the reason flex between is not working is because the height is the same. If I had given it a bit of bigger height, it will have done the same thing too. But it's mostly only used for row, right? We get into other parts right now. I think I may have mixed the two up. Actually, justify content, I think that right, justify content does not actually work for your horizontal axis, vertical axis rather. Most times, you would want to use align items for that. For that, let me change column and before column can stay. Align items. Now we have five different types of main align items. We have the flex start, we have the flex end, center, stretch, baseline, and all of that. Go through them one by one. Let's start with flex start, which, funny enough, is not the default in this situation. Won't really make much of a difference, right? But for us to actually see it more, let's change this to so. Okay, there we go. Let's just take it this way for now and add height. Let's add the default height of 500 pixels. So much. 500 pixels. Okay, there we go. So flex start, what does this? It determines where or it determines how the position of the items horizontally. Right. So right now we said flex start. So flex start makes it be at the top of the items, right? Then let's look at flex end. Flex end puts it at the bottom of the container. That's what flex end does. Then we have center. Center centers it on the horizontal, and then because we have center on the vertical as well, because we have center on the horizontal and we have center on the vertical, we're able to have like our text at the center of everything. Yeah. Then we have stretch. Now, stretch won't really be useful. It won't be that obvious right now because these divs don't have background colors. For that, let's have background colors for so I can actually know what we are working with. Yeah, so um let me be not that much of a color person. Hopefully this shows. Huh, I'm here to apply it. Plus copy this Sorry, I don't have an editor yet, so you would have to follow me through this. So when we load this, ah, why is not working? We have item, we have div class item. Wow, we're getting something. Okay, let me try this. Let's add the height. Also for the pictures. Okay, interesting. What are we doing wrong? To get the bottom of what we are doing wrong, let's inspect and see what's going on. Ah, it's wrong. I see. So we did not add a semicolon, we added a colon. There we go. Okay. You see something missing. Let's add the padding. We talked about it earlier. Um, Started mixing it like that then. Because padding won't work. What am I kidding? Margin. Oh, let's add margin left on all of them. There we go. So welcome back from that break. So this was stretch does, yeah. Basically stretches the content but at the full length or the full height rather of the container. I've removed the height. So it stretches it in total. Let me go over it and show you again, yeah. Let's see center, right? So what center does? It centers it horizontally, vertically rather, and also kind of shrinks it to just the content. For or stretch kind of makes the whole content take the full space, the full height, right? Then we have the baseline. Now, baseline mostly used a lot when it comes to trying to add menu items. Yeah. So it almost works like flex that, except if we have contents that are lower, right? It will try to center it. Let me show you examples of that. In our div here, say we have a break line here, right? Instead of the other text to follow, you only stay there, right? It's trying to like balance the whole thing across it. So let's see. Let's also look at let's see if we can look at align content. Okay, someone is saying, yeah. So we cheated earlier, right? And what we did earlier was by adding margin left. That's not what we were supposed to add. We wanted space between our our items in the container, in the flex container. What you use is called gap. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, you can add gaps in different ways, right? You can use just gap to give a gap between across the x-axis and the y-axis, or basically across the horizontal and the vertical axis. And that's the first one we'll work with. So let's put a gap of 10 px. I believe that's what we did earlier. And we load. Notice that there's now a little change. We don't have sort of like that small margin here anymore, but then we still have spaces. That's what gap does. So what gap does is it gives spaces between the items in the container, right? And of course, you can make it as much as you want. And regardless that you're putting spaces, it will still be whatever alignment that you use, whatever justified content that you use, right? It also works the same thing if you have horizontal, if you have columns, yeah. So if you have your columns as well, it also works the same way, right? But the same thing. So let's put it back to row. And then we've done this already, but I need to show you that there are two ways there are three ways actually that you can write, two or three ways you can write your gap. You can decide to specify only a row gap. Now, this is in case if you are using your CSS property, you want to apply it for sometimes your row or sometimes your column. So of course you can add that 20 px. Works the same way, right? But it only works for me in this case. So let's add a column gap 20 px. And right then I'll explain why it's like that. Now remember, column works on the vertical and row works on the horizontal. Right now, we define this all at once, yeah, and so we said, okay, what are flex direction to be row, but then our row gap did not work because flex does not use this as a row. The spaces here are not spaces between. I want to say maybe I can explain this. They are called horizontal spaces because they give spaces between rows, right? And they go all the way down. That's why they are called like column gap. Now, the reason the row does not seem to work is because we do not have other items down here. We will get to that later when we start working more on layout. So really, that's just about it about Flexbox. It might look daunting at first when you start working with it, but the more you work with it, the more you see that it's actually quite easy to start with because there will be few mistakes along the way, but you get the end of it later. Right. See you next video.